Welcome back to the Gundam Retrospective with a look at the second half of the OVA series, Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn. Just a heads up, this is the second video about the Unicorn series. I will have a link to the first video that I did covering the first 3 episodes down in the description, so if you missed that, make sure to check that video out first. In this video, we will be going over the final 4 episodes of the OVA series and wrapping up the events that occurred around the incident involving Laplace's box. Just a heads up for those of you that are familiar with this channel, this video will feature a lot more stills and such because getting the first Unicorn video to stay up was pretty torturous. At the end of the day, I don't like the amount of visual editing I had to do to have that video allowed on the platform, but that's sort of the way YouTube is, and we just got to evolve and move around it. So without further ado, let's rejoin Banagher and the rest of the Argama crew for the rest of the tale of Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn. Before we pick back up and begin talking about episode 4, let me make some corrections from last video. 1. Ride does not pilot a rebuild of the Hyaku Shiki. It is actually a variant of the Delta Gundam, the prototype suit that would later be developed into the Shiki. So in a sense, they are brothers. Should have called this one the Hyaku Sneaky. 2. More people than usual are taking issue with my pronunciation of Banagi. I attribute this to the fact that Unicorn's dub is really popular, and again, I'm using the Japanese pronunciation, so it is what it is. On the other hand, Garenciere is way easier to say than Garenceries, so at the end of the day, sorry about that one. I don't know. Episode 4 begins with Old Man Siam Vist watching the news, which is broadcasting an ongoing attack on the city of Dakar. It seems that Full Frontal has been using some Zeon remnants that have been hiding out on Earth since the end of the One-Year War, and they must have jumped at the chance to take the fight back to the Federation once more. This segment was animated in 2D, and man, I really love the look of this. It really makes the CG, which is not bad, mind you, stand out even more. This is probably the best that Gundam has looked since 8th MS Team, and I hold that show in pretty high regard, so that's high praise coming from me. Martha immediately knows that Ronin Marcenas is harboring Mineva, and this is where the truth of the Marcenas family is finally revealed to Ride. Also, another thing with pronouncing names, I know people pronounce Ride differently, even in the dub. Literally, there are characters that pronounce it Reed, characters that pronounce it Riddy, and characters that pronounce it Ride, so I'm just going with my gut on that one. The Marcenas family, a powerful pillar of the Federation's power structure, gained their influence by being co-conspirators with the Vist Foundation. Knowing about Laplace's box and what it could do to the Federation has benefited Ride's family for 100 years, and the kid really can't handle that fact. I don't talk much about Ride in the first video as he doesn't have all that much to do in the first 3 episodes, but now I can say that I really kinda don't like him at all. Ride is basically just a rich trust fund kid that ran away from home to, separate himself from his family name. Despite joining the military and doing what he believes to be right, you can bet the Marcenas name has given him some perks here and there throughout his military career. And when the shit hits the fan, his first thought is to kidnap Mineva and run home to have daddy fix it. When faced with the reality of his family's backroom dealings, he gets super upset and asks Minerva to always stay with him before riding away on a horse, as he definitely has an eye for drama. To go even further with Ride's character, the guy starts falling in love with Mineva, which I'm led to believe was a pretty big factor in him deciding to help her escape, and Ride's a 23-year-old man while Mineva's like 16, so he's basically just kind of a loser. Anyway, Marita is interrogated by Martha, who says some really terrible things to her, namely that she's nothing but a puppet created by men who wanted only bloodshed. She then shows Marita a mass production type Cubile from the first Neo-Zeon War, which gives her a PTSD flashback and makes her more prone to being brainwashed and reprogrammed by Martha. Martha plans on using an enslaved Marita to pilot a mobile suit known as the RX-0 Banshee, a black and gold version of the Unicorn that looks pretty damn rad. Meanwhile, we get to spend some time with the commander of Londo Bell, Bright Noah, the man who has captained ships and mobile suit pilots for what, like 3 wars now? He's told by Ronan Versanis that the Nail Argama is being detained in orbit at the behest of the Vist Foundation, and also the Garancier has crash-landed in Africa. Ronan wants Bright to use the Rockylum to go and capture or destroy the ship before the Vist Foundation can get their hands on it. But Bright says that Londo Bell shouldn't be dispatched for what appears to be a personal errand. Well, Ronan throws all his chips on the table at that point and tells Bright that they have Laplace's box. But then the meeting is interrupted by the news that Mineva has escaped. Luckily, the young princess doesn't go too far, content to go and hang out with an old dude at a nearby diner. She has a conversation with the diner's owner, explaining that while he says there really isn't much to see around there, she's happy just to be able to set foot on Earth. He reminisces about stories his grandparents told him of the bad old days on Earth, all while whipping out a classy old man pipe and toking it up. Grandpa likes to get a little loose after work, I see. He believes that the Federation's good intentions for the colonies were dashed by the One-Year War. However, the picture of the young soldier on his wall may betray some bias on his side. In the end, the owner can't offer much reassurance to Mineva beyond a simple cup of coffee, and it isn't long until Ronan's men come and pick her up. I do want to pay some attention to the beautiful work that went into not only the lighting of these scenes, but the animation on the old guy's hand. It's something that I watched over a few times, and Unicorn never really stops impressing on the visual front. Also, I appreciate that Unicorn is so happy to swim neck deep in its own history and philosophy that even old diner owners can have a super deep conversation at the drop of a hat. At least he got a good tip. Catching back up with Banagher, it seems he was able to latch onto the Garancier while it descended to Earth, and as such he is now in the crew's custody, though they wouldn't have to try very hard to keep him contained because Banagher is just about at the lowest point that any Gundam pilot could be. When we last saw him, he had fired a shot in desperation and anger, a shot that was meant for full frontal but was blocked by a man named Gilboa. Now, Banagher not only contends with the guilt of killing someone who had only ever shown him kindness, but also facing the wrath of Gilboa's former crew. Zinnerman can't really believe that an Earth-bound Zeon remnant hit D'Qar while being so underprepared, though Shoal pipes up and he does remark that these guys have missed out on 2 Neo-Zeon wars up in space, so they're pretty much raring to go at this point. Zinnerman needs to get across the desert to link up with these Zeon remnants. But with the ship being crippled and the mobile suits either damaged or just stuck inside the buried hangar, it looks like it's going to be a long trek on foot. Banagher begins his walk through the dunes, wondering what he's fighting for. I mean, he did what he was supposed to do, right? Banagher begins to spiral in his own self-doubt, thinking that he just can't go on and is willing to lay down in the desert and die. It's only through his time spent learning about Zinnerman that Banagher begins to see the light, so to speak. Zinnerman tells him about his family that used to live inside 3 and how their town was attacked by the occupying Federation soldiers. Zinnerman's family was killed while he was a prisoner of war, and nothing he could do would bring them back. In fact, Zinnerman is pretty much at the end of his story when we meet him in Unicorn. The only reason he ever met and subsequently saved Merida from a life of sex slavery was because he was tracking down a man involved in his family's murder in order to kill him. Zinnerman is a person who should be able to see eye to eye with Banagher, at least on a surface level. Where Banagher believes that he has nothing to fight for, Zinnerman has literally been there and somehow he kept going. It's through this story and this depth of understanding that Zinnerman is able to reach Banagher, telling him it's okay for him to cry and process his emotions. We see that after their conversation, Banagher is refreshed and, even more importantly, he has new motivation. He remarks that someone told him to find a better way to use the box, and that's still what he intends to do. The Garancier is pulled from the sand with the help of the Zeon remnant, and Zinnerman contacts Full Frontal with the location of the next set of coordinates, Torrington Base in Australia. Knowing that the next location is Torrington, they all kind of wonder if it's a good idea to attack so soon after the events in D'Qar. For one, they point out that Dakar, while being fortified and protected by the military, is a city and a civilian population center, while Torrington is a full-on military base that will be much more heavily defended. Despite the risks, we see Zeon remnants getting activated through the use of old codes that date back to the One-Year War. These guys have been waiting long enough, and the danger of attacking a dug-in military base doesn't seem to faze them at all. The Zeons start attacking Torrington, with Yoni piloting a huge mobile armor from the start of the episode. This armor is known as the AMA-X7 Shamblo and is pretty impressive in both of its appearances. Banagher wants to head straight out into the Unicorn to fly through the coordinates, but Zinnerman tells him to wait until Torrington's flak guns are destroyed. Banagher is understandably anxious to get going when he realizes the Zeon are attacking civilians that have been caught in the crossfire. When he explains this to Zinnerman, Zinnerman's like, well, vengeance is pretty cool, and it still doesn't make me as bad as the Fetties, so shut the fuck up, kid. It's one of the only times in Unicorn that we see Zinnerman actually kind of like give in to his inner darkness. While he almost gives in to the need for revenge, Banagher is there to bring him back to reality, making him recognize that he's just sort of perpetuating a cycle of violence that will never end. Well, it does take a little effort. I mean, Zinnerman beats the shit out of Banagher and pulls a gun on him, and we all know that if you're pulling a weapon on a 15-year-old, you've got to be right. Banagher is able to pull off a pretty good nut shot and curb stomp combo, and we see that the crew, probably knowing the captain to be in the wrong, refuses to help. After professing their manly feelings through beating each other up, Banagher launches in the Unicorn and goes to stop Yoni from attacking the city. While Banagher tries to get through to her, we meet some of my favorite suits in the entire series. Dispatched from the Rockylum is a trio of pilots known as the Black Tri-Stars, a returning motif from earlier in the series to be sure. They arrive in one of my all-time favorite non-Gundam type suits, the RGM-96X Jesta. These things are lean, they're mean, and you can have them in any color as long as it's black. I really love the overall design of the suits and their weapons as a tool used by special operations groups, and I think Unicorn loves them too because they're used really well during the battle for Torrington. One of the Zeon rebels named Yonam tries to detonate his suit's reactor in order to take them all out with a nuclear explosion, but they're luckily able to stop him. Banagher is desperately trying to talk Yoni out of damaging the city any further and is backed up by the arrival of Ride, who returned to the Rockylum. He cannot seem to get through to the Zeon pilot, who's freaking out over the death of her comrades, and finally Banagher realizes he can use the Unicorn's NTD mode to reach out to her consciousness in an attempt to soothe her. It doesn't initially work, but this is a big step towards Banagher using the Unicorn in his own way. While so far we've only seen the NTD mode used to destroy, I mean it's in the name, we now see that Banagher can use it as a tool to enhance his own abilities and better understand those around him. When Banagher cannot break through, the spirit of the recently deceased Yonam appears and tells Yoni that her war is over. Which, those are kind of big words from a guy who just tried to kill everybody with a nuke. Not even this seems to be enough to get through to her as Yoni pulls the trigger on her biggest weapon in a despair-induced stupor. Banagher finds himself unable to fire at Yoni even if it means saving part of the city, and this is one of the only instances where I'll give Ride some credit because his move where he grabs the rifle from Banagher and uses it to kill her is pretty sick. This leaves Banagher quite distraught and Ride pretty pissed as he has no idea what kind of stunt the young pilot was gonna pull. Ride decides to hold the Unicorn at gunpoint and orders Banagher to exit, saying he's taking the suit back, but before their standoff boils over, a new suit appears from above. The newly arrived RX-0 Unit 2, codenamed the Banshee, a black unicorn that appears as oppressive as it is powerful. While at first Ride thinks it may be friendly, he's quickly proven wrong when it starts firing at them. Banagher is tackled and knocked out inside the cockpit, with the glowing eyes of the black unicorn being the last thing he sees until he wakes up aboard the Rockylum. Banagher is shocked to see that the black unicorn's pilot is Marita. In fact, he's so shocked that he blacks out for a second. The Laplace program activates and gives him the next set of coordinates, but Banagher refuses to open the cockpit door. Even after they get inside the Unicorn, Banagher has put a lock on the program and refuses to talk. This causes Martha to ask Mineva to convince him to give over the coordinates, and she says that the Vist Foundation only wants to permanently seal the box. Of course, she, being the new head of the Foundation, would want to protect the status quo and cling on to her family's power. Now knowing that Banagher is Cardias' son and not wanting further harm to come to him, Mineva requests that Martha release Marita Cruz in return for her help. Martha says that Marita is there on her own behalf and she's no wish to go anywhere else since she's been reprogrammed, and Martha doesn't feel the smallest shred of guilt about that, saying that Neo Zeon were the ones who originally brainwashed her anyway. She even goes so far as to saying that she's giving Marita a chance at revenge. But honestly, Martha's a pretty fucked up person. With Martha's ship coming to pick up the unicorn from the Rockylum, Bright decides to go talk to Banagher, feeling a sort of connection to him because of his history being a father figure to every important new type, basically. Also, I want to say that I fucking love Bright. He's one of my favorite characters. While being the commander of Londo Bell, he's still looking to do the right thing even if it means going against his superiors. The guy has connections within different factions of the media and government, as seen through his communication with both Kai and the returning Beltorchica. Bright is just an MVP in every series, and that does not stop in Unicorn. Also, he has a big picture of Amuro in his office on the wall, and that is adorable. Banagher says he's keeping the coordinates secret because he doesn't want the location to become a battlefield, and Bright's response is basically like, well, that's fine, you don't gotta tell me, I don't give a shit. They have a conversation about Banagher's time aboard the Garancier, and how he has a hard time categorizing people into friend or foe. Bright seems to realize that Banagher has a sort of hidden inner strength, even telling him that every Gundam pilot that came before him found their way into their machines through chance, but made their destiny their own. Banagher trusts Bright enough that he tells him that his goal is currently to save Audrey Byrne, the one everyone calls Mineva Zabi. I think this is an important distinction that I want to bring up. Banagher is the only one who continues to call her Audrey, and it feels as though he's the only one who sees her as a person and not just Zeon's princess. Directly after this, Bright gets the news that sets the rest of the plot into action. Federation, General Staff HQ, and the Vist Foundation have come to an agreement, and have decided to do away with anyone that knows about the box. This means that the Nail Argama is in trouble and the Federation's current flagship, the General Revel, is headed to attack. So Bright has contacts within a company called Luo & Co., basically a competitor to the Vist Foundation that has an interest in seeing them lose some power, and he asks Beltorchica to contact none other than the Garancier. Zinnerman receives Bright's message through his contact, Kai Shiden. Not only is Zinnerman told Mineva's location, but also that if they decide to pull off a rescue operation, they'll have plenty of help. The only catch being that the ones helping will be the Nail Argama, the ship that the Garancier has been fighting since the beginning of the series. While Zinnerman is surprised to see a commander in the Federation willing to work with the Neo Zeon, he isn't exactly going to pass up the opportunity or turn up his nose to help. In fact, we get the feeling that he would have attempted the rescue even without their help. Finally, Bright muses that he is betting it all on Banagher's intuition, like he did back in the One-Year War. Despite the objections of the Vist Foundation reps who have been held back by the Tri-Stars, Bright talks to Banagher and tells him that Audrey is on board the Garuda. Bright tells him that the only way to keep the unicorn out of the hands of the conspirators is to work with the Garancier and get back to the Nail Argama. Bright knows that this path could be full of despair for Banagher, but he believes that the strength of a Gundam pilot will shine through. As our young hero straps into the cockpit and powers on the RX-0, it really feels like the first time he has a goal to accomplish beyond pure survival. Banagher is determined, and unlike when he used the unicorn to fight full frontal above Earth, he has a clear head and knows the path before him. Even if he doesn't know the exact steps he'll have to take upon that path. Of course, we get some shots of Ride being all upset during the briefing, especially when he is noticed by the Tri-Stars. Ride has a huge self-confidence issue, and anytime he's held up to scrutiny from other pilots or his superiors, he starts to crumble. This is probably why he isn't let in on the plan to escort the Unicorn to the Argama, even though Ride is an accomplished pilot with a high-spec machine in the Delta Plus. We even get an aside with the TriStars wondering if Ride knows the plan, and if he'll be an issue pulling off the orders during battle. As they're approaching the Vist Foundation Garuda to transfer the Unicorn Gundam, the Guernciere appears and attacks without warning. When they're asked for help, the Rockylum is like, yeah, we're under orders to deliver this here mobile suit, so you're on your own. When Banagher enters the battle, he immediately tries to grapple with Marita and the Gundam Banshee, mostly to keep her from interfering with Zinnerman's rescue plan. He tries to get through to her and make her forget the reconditioning, and the only thing that starts to break through are the memories of Zinnerman. Of course, things can never be that easy, and both suits end up activating their NTD mode. I really love how dynamic this fight is. The suits are fighting in Earth's upper atmosphere and not space, so there's still weight and momentum to deal with. As much as I love a good Gundam space battle, the operations where pilots are taking weight and positioning into account are always my favorite. I also love this moment where Banagher kicks Watts right off his base jabber by just Mario stomping him. Maybe it would have been a good idea to clue Ride in on the plan, because his whole wildcard shtick doesn't really serve him well. He attempts to board the Garuda to rescue Mineva on his own accord, not knowing that Zinnerman and the Guernciere crew have the exact same objective. Ride tells Martha and her guards that she can have Banagher and the Unicorn, but he's taking Mineva with him, and there's no way they can shoot him because he's Ronan Marcenas' son, which is a plan that's worked out so far. Ride isn't exactly a forward thinker, and Mineva even asks him what his plan is after this, and he just reveals that he doesn't have one right in front of everybody. Mineva calls him out on his lack of foresight in front of everybody, and when she learns that he knows the contents of Laplace's box, she just begs him to tell everybody right there. However, Mineva is distracted by Banagher's fight outside, which really makes Ride angry because he's sort of a petulant child, and he gets really mad that Mineva wants to go hang out with someone her own age instead of a 26-year-old. Sorry, I don't like Ride. Then their conversation is interrupted by rifle fire, courtesy of Zinnerman, who had just infiltrated the ship. He gives Mineva a jetpack and tells her to get to the Guernciere, and the two are separated by a huge explosion. Without the jetpack that was just handed to her, with it being destroyed in said explosion, and not wanting to go with Ride, Mineva is left with one option: to leap from the Garuda and believe that Banagher would save her. Luckily, Banagher, who's been fighting the Unicorn from activating the NTD mode the entire time, is able to use the amped up state to catch Mineva in midair. Banagher won't activate NTD mode to fight, but he has absolutely no problem with activating it to save others, and this is a great moment where we first see Banagher's potential. With Mineva's reassurance, Banagher now believes he can both get through to Marita and save Zinnerman from the damaged ship. Ultimately, we end up with both Unicorn suits inside the hangar, with Ride showing up and getting really angry once again. The Banshee identifies the Delta Plus as a Gundam-type suit and goes on a rampage, ripping it limb from limb. So long, Hyaku Sneaky, you were cool while you lasted. Ride makes it out of the suit and then proclaims that he hates all Gundams while shooting his pistol at the Banshee. And then this causes it to scan itself and realize that it itself is a Gundam, which makes the suit freak out and the NTD mode turn off. And now I think about that, that's kind of a really bad design flaw, don't you think? The Nail Argama is supposed to meet up with the Guernciere, but the ship has been damaged in the battle and is now veering off course. Banagher and the other pilots get out and start to literally push the ship back on track, but in the end it isn't enough. Luckily, Banagher is able to activate the NTD mode and literally grab the tether to connect the ships together. I really wish that giant truck just idling outside my fucking house would stop. It's not even a truck, it's a little piece of shit Mitsubishi, driven by a little piece of shit, no doubt. Alright. The ships glow together in a new type-induced psycho field, and Banagher can feel the spirits of the Guza and Gilboa watching over him. For once, we kind of get a triumphant moment for our Gundam pilot, as it is his will that saves the day, at least for the moment. However, the Federation's General Revel appears on the Argama's tail and starts dispatching a ton of mobile suits. Banagher's efforts are almost for naught, but Full Frontal and Angelo show up just in the nick of time and fight off the Revel. And of course, this battle exists to show us just how much of a badass Frontal is once more, as he attacks the Revel directly, fighting through both their platoon of mobile suits and an energy dispersal field. In fact, Frontal is such a huge badass that the General Revel turns around and just gets the hell out of there. Who would have thought that the man trying to blow up the Argama at the start of the show would be protecting it now? Mineva and Banagher talk about how their separate journeys across the Earth have changed them, but they now both believe humanity to have good intentions at its heart. Both of them are now determined to claim Laplace's box to keep it out of the hands of both Federation and Zeon. With both the Neo Zeon pilots and the crew aboard the Nail Argama, the tension between the two factions grows increasingly hostile. The Tri-Stars, not knowing that the Unicorn has escaped with the Argama already, try to stop the Garancier and demand that it hands over the Unicorn. They fire a warning shot at it, only for the entire ship to explode, an empty ship set up as a diversion so everyone else could escape. So long, Garancier, you were a cool ship, and now I can stop struggling to pronounce your name. The atmosphere just gets angrier and angrier aboard the Argama, with the Federation crew not wanting to hand the ship over to Neo Zeon soldiers. Apparently, the Zeon demand access to the engine room, and even though the Nail Argama's crew are wanted dead by the Federation, they refuse and bar the door. And Angelo is probably the worst spokesperson that Zeon could have. I mean, he's got that aristocratic air that the old Principality would have loved. It takes the combined efforts of Mineva and Captain Midas to calm the waters for a moment, though Midas was schmoozed into it by Frontal, who he has obvious disdain for. The Argama's next objective is reaching a location known as the Shoal Zone, which is the site of the Battle of Loam from the One-Year War. Famously, this battle was where a young Char Aznable made a name for himself through his incredible combat prowess. The Laplace program seems to be taking them on a sort of memorial tour of the UC, which is both convenient and also pretty fitting for a show as important to the canon as Unicorn. Frontal is finally asked to actually explain his plan by both Captain Midas and Mineva, and he reveals that he truly does want Spacenoid independence, but he realizes that the Federation will just literally never let that happen because the damaged Earth is not sufficient enough to feed its own population. Because the people that do live on Earth rely on food grown in agricultural colonies located in space, they would basically fall into complete famine and poverty if they were ever segregated. And of course, the fear of even letting Spacenoids have any sort of real power, thinking that Earthlings would become a second class of citizens if that were to happen. Currently, the Republic of Zeon is independent in name only, and Frontal worries that within a few more years, the Federation will restructure it back into Side 3. He believes obtaining the box will give him enough political power to buy time to put his true plan into action. An economic alliance between the colonies and Moon called the Side Co-Prosperity Sphere. This alliance would cut Earth out altogether, and while that sounds great for all those living in the colonies, Mineva points out that it would jumpstart another one-year war. The political sphere would leave Earth in complete poverty, with mass famines demolishing the remaining population. It would just basically be a genocide. Neither Banagher or Mineva are impressed with Frontal's answer, to say the least, as they both believe in the possibility of a brighter future, and Mineva announces the final set of coordinates, right back at the colony builder on Industrial 7. Perhaps because of some budding feelings for Banagher, or because she just truly doesn't think he's up to the task, Mineva says that the final stint of the journey is too big of a task for him, and then leaves. Kind of a confidence killer right when he needs it the most, Mineva, what the fuck? Banagher then goes to the infirmary to be with a recovering Merida. He asks her what her favorite food is, and she's pretty baffled by his attempt at small talk. He tells her that he would rather talk about what she loves than what she hates, and that line really resonated with me when I first heard it. In a conversation with Full Frontal, Zinnerman admits that he cannot let go of his hatred of the Federation. However, he is tired of being a person who feels hopeless and angry and is trying to move on. This is what makes me think that Unicorn is the most hopeful and most emotionally deep Gundam series so far. A patrolling Federation ship receives a distress signal from the Argama. A group of crew members would rather face whatever the Federation will do to them than put up with the Zeon, so they banded together and sent out a signal. Angelo reveals that his men have taken these dissenters captive and are holding them at gunpoint. Angelo pulls a gun on Captain Midas and tells him to fire on the investigating ship, but it doesn't work as the captain just calls him a terrorist and refuses. Meanwhile, some of the Special Forces soldiers on board have taken it upon themselves to sneak in through the ventilation shaft and take out the Zeon soldiers. Banagher is told to get to the Unicorn and use it to disable the Zeon suits in the hangar to limit unnecessary combat. But when he arrives, Full Frontal is already there and waiting for him. Now that Full Frontal knows the final set of coordinates stored in the Laplace program thanks to Mineva, he says he could just literally kill Banagher if he wanted to and be done with it. Frontal doesn't really want to kill Banagher though, instead he offers the young pilot a chance to come with him and become a vessel for the wishes of humanity. Frontal is an interesting and enigmatic person. Even now in episode 6, we don't know his origin or backstory, and we've just learned his overall goal. Frontal does tell Banagher that he isn't so different from a cyber new type, which could be a reference to the novel in which Banagher was a cyber new type experimented on by Cardius. Unicorn's OVA adaptation leaves this point ambiguous, and the story works whether or not Banagher is a cyber or natural new type. Frontal, on the other hand, remains a pretty big mystery, and as far as I can tell, the accepted theory on his life is as such. Frontal was a cyber new type created by Neo Zeon that went through reconstructive surgery to change his appearance and look like Char. Beyond just looking like him, he also has some of the Red Comet's memories, as apparently the recovered Psycho frame from Char's Sazabi was able to influence his personality. Anyway, all this info comes from other various sources, and while it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, it is really interesting to think where Char ends and Full Frontal begins. Banagher tells Frontal that he wishes to use the box for everyone, Space Noids, Earthlings, it doesn't really matter. Frontal is bemused by this, saying that if he chooses to walk that path, then Banagher will go through the same despair that he did. And this is where you can do some fun conspiracy posting about whether Frontal is referring to what he's done during the Laplace incident or the actions that Char took during the various Zeonic wars. Banagher and Frontal's struggle is interrupted when Mineva and Marita climb into the cockpit of the old quad wing and tell Frontal that he's kind of a big idiot and they hate him, basically. Marita is ordered out of the cockpit by a grief-stricken Zinnerman, but he quickly goes back on that order when she calls him father and asks him to let her have her way just this once. Zinnerman is obviously still overcome with grief and a feeling of helplessness over his deceased family, and man, the way that they present it here it really got me. If you can't empathize with him, then you're just a monster. Angelo fails to kill Zinnerman, and Banagher is able to use his new type Fu to wrestle away from Full Frontal and enter the Unicorn's cockpit. Realizing that he is about to be caught, Frontal and Angelo blast through the hangar doors and leave the ship, telling Banagher that the race to the box is now on. And that isn't the only bad news, because Ride shows up in the Banshee looking for a fight. Yeah, looks like Martha found a new boy toy, though she does tell Ride that if he can't stop the Unicorn, the Vist Foundation will use its last resort, which I could only assume is a giant laser of some kind. Well, we will find out soon enough as Martha, Ronan, and Alberto arrive at the Federation's Cheyenne Mountain base to observe the battle around Industrial 7. We learn that if the battle doesn't go their way, Martha does indeed plan to use a giant laser to destroy the entire colony and the box along with it. The weapon's name is Grips 2, a throwback to Zeta Gundam, and a couple of points off for originality. Kai Shiden, being one of the most useful characters in this series, contacts Bright with info about Grips 2. Bright, when faced with the choice between backing up the Nail Argama and stopping Martha's plan to use a super weapon to annihilate an entire colony, decides to descend to Earth and take on the forces defending Cheyenne Base. While the battle between the Argama and Neo Zeon rages, we get a ton of amazing animation and one of the best looking mecha battles that has ever been put on screen. Combined with the incredibly rich soundtrack and effects that can really shake your windows on a good sound system, Unicorn just rubs its money all over the screen constantly. Ride and Banagher fight each other, and while Ride has been pushing his machine to obtain NTD mode, Banagher has been holding the Unicorn back. When Ride learns this, he gets really upset and thinks that Banagher is taunting him, which finally activates the Banshee's Destroy mode. He goes on a rant about how he's gonna exterminate all new types because they're responsible for everything bad in the world, only for Banagher to tell him that he literally could not be piloting the Banshee to its current potential if he himself weren't a new type. And this really fries Ride's brain a little bit. Oh yeah, also during the battle, there's a mobile suit that shoots like a Dragon Ball Z Nappa mouth laser, and I thought that was pretty cool. Marita joins the battle in the Kshatriya and tries to distract Ride so that Banagher can serve as the tip of the spear and punch through towards Industrial 7. Unfortunately, Angelo also shows up and traps the Unicorn in some sort of field that disables its Psychommu and disengages the NTD mode. Mineva reaches out to Ride and asks him to help Banagher and listen to his own heart. Suddenly, Ride can feel the thoughts of everyone, including people like Zinnerman and Alberto, but the voices are too intense for him to bear, and he decides to lay the blame on everybody else, firing a shot that completely decimates the Kshatriya and Marita. It's only after Marita's spirit reaches out to him that Ride realizes what he has done and how hard he's fallen. He even goes so far as to ask Banagher to kill him. Marita's spirit reaches out to those who were important to her, most obviously Zinnerman. She calls him her father and thanks him for being her light, a second chance at life she didn't even imagine she could have as a child soldier. Man, Zinnerman gets so fucked over in this show. As he wanders off the bridge, lost in his own thoughts, I just want to give the guy a big hug and a bottle of Jack Daniels. Also, outside in the battle, Angelo gets really upset as he sees a vision of Full Frontal with his back turned but facing towards Banagher. Angelo cannot fathom why someone like Frontal would be so interested in Banagher and not him, being one of his most loyal soldiers. He freaks out and tells Banagher not to look at him, and the new type resonance with his Rosen Zulu is so strong because of his heightened emotional state that it turns its claw weapons on itself and rips its own cockpit apart. Despite the loss of Marita, the battle has turned enough for the Argama to use its main gun, destroying 2 Neo Zeon ships in the process. The other Zeon ships decide to retreat after seeing this. Back down on Earth, Bright arrives at Cheyenne Base and announces that he's using his authority as the commander of Londo Bell to conduct a search of the facility. The Tri-Stars use their Jestas to sneak up and disable the base guards, and I never really thought I wanted to see a stealth mobile suit like this before, but man, it's really cool. The Nail Argama arrives at Industrial 7 and its mobile suits slip inside undetected, almost too easily. The Argama is damaged, but Zinnerman says that it is battle-ready by Zeon standards. Maybe it's just him being paranoid about Frontal being nowhere to be found, or the fact that the General Revel just sort of gave up trying to catch them. Either way, everyone is on edge, as this seems like it's just too easy. Mineva and Banagher are shown an image of the tapestry from the Vist mansion on the Unicorn screen, and surmise that that is where the box is located. Despite the colony builder stopping its own rotation for some reason, the two head inside the mansion to find the tapestry, and a secret door opens while they hear the words of Siam Vist. It seems that he's been there the whole time, waiting on someone worthy to inherit the box, and seems glad that his own flesh and blood is the one to do it. Banagher and Mineva float through the passage, which appears to be a big hologram, and they're told about evolution and how the arrival of new types could reform human consciousness. Finally, the reveal of what is actually within Laplace's box comes, and it is the original Universal Century Charter, one that quite remarkably has an extra article included at the bottom that would confirm new types exist and should be involved in leading humanity forward. This in itself is a pretty interesting reveal. I mean, what the MacGuffin actually is always less interesting than what it represents in storytelling, but here I think it's pretty weighty and appropriate. Because a lot of the strife in the Universal Century during the One Year War and beyond can be blamed on new type theory, this is a pretty big smack upside the head to the administration. And it should show them that their leadership has always been looking towards that philosophy in the future. Mineva is worried that the original charter could be used by Neo Zeon to bring about a second one-year war, and Siam explains that is why he wanted to entrust it to a true new type like Banagher or Mineva. The Unicorn Gundam, while it was sold as a new type hunting monster, was actually designed by Cardias to work with the Laplace program to lead a true new type to the box. Because unlike a cyber new type, apparently a true new type's psycho waves are immeasurable. Siam tells them both that his true wish as the box's guardian was to give it to someone who could prove that new types exist. But he also tells them to do what they want with it and even kill him if they want. He's just like, whatever man, I'm old. Outside, a floating Ride tells the Argama crew over the radio what is inside the box. Ride believes that the article would be the ultimate weapon for Zeon. Ride then has a little cry to everyone over the radio, but is interrupted by weapons fire near the colony that they think may be full frontal. Banagher doesn't really know what he wants to do with the box, and he says he doesn't even know if he has the qualities that Siam is looking for. But he pulls out his old catchphrase. Even so, Banagher wants to believe in a brighter future and the old Gundam trope of the Beast of Possibility. A hope that if they take that chance, things will work out for the better. That humanity is innately good at its core and can always move forward. Banagher is presented with a way to contact every person on Earth, basically, something Siam says was really hard to do even with the Foundation's resources. But before they can use it, Full Frontal shows up wearing a normal suit that makes him look the most Char-like that he has ever looked. Also, Frontal seems to be able to control his Sinanju remotely now, which is pretty cool. Frontal tells Siam that he wants to take the box, but Siam hits him with the therapist talk and is like, hey, maybe it's time for Char to rest and leave the future in the hands of a new generation. Unfortunately, Siam didn't dump enough points into the Paragon stat while sitting here for 100 years, so he fails that dialogue option and Frontal starts shooting at them. I didn't really expect Siam to control flying laser drones with his brain, but it was kind of funny. Banagher ends up running outside to get to the Unicorn, but Frontal shows up in the Neo Zhang, which I thought was the Sinanju before, but I didn't correct the script because I didn't want to ruin the true reveal of this chonky boy. Guile shows up in a suit called the ARX-014 Silver Bullet, which has dual-wielding rocket fist beam saber action. That weapon really feels like they threw darts at a board. And while this suit is cool, it's on screen for all of 1 minute before it's reduced to just a torso by Frontal's 40k Space Marine shoulder pad having giant. Banagher makes it to the Unicorn and follows Frontal outside, where Ensign Ride joins the battle. Now it's a 2-on-1 fight, with the Black Lion and the White Unicorn defending the box. Just like on the Tapestry, the Neo Zhang puts out this field that destroys the Gundam's armaments, but that's okay because Banagher has Gundam Fu and just starts literally karate chopping chunks off of the Zeon suit. The animation here is pretty good, and it's about as silly as Unicorn gets. Although we aren't approaching Gurren Lagann territory or anything, it is a little weird to see outside of something like Doan's Island. If you know, you know. The Unicorn and Neo Zhang resonate with each other and put out a psycho field similar to the Axis shock event that ended Char's counterattack. Banagher and Frontal are able to see through time itself with their new type powers, watching the conclusion to the One-Year War and the Laplace incident. Man, seeing the end of the original Gundam in this style is so nice. I would love for an extension of the original series or just a remake. Frontal takes Banagher all the way to the end of time from Chrono Trigger, where all life and light in the universe has ceased to exist. Even the passage of time is literally impossible where they end up. It's Frontal's way of showing Banagher that humanity struggles in vain because, like, this is their destiny no matter what. The universe is going to end no matter what, which, pretty doomer take, honestly, Frontal. Banagher is able to produce a small amount of light that envelops himself and Frontal, and then out of nowhere the spirits of Lala Soon and Char Aznable show up and say that Char's ideals have been expressed to their full extent, and now it's time to leave. Banagher finds himself back at Industrial 7, with the Sinanju crumbling to dust before him, and the voice of Full Frontal echoing that he leaves everything to Banagher. They aren't out of the woods yet though, as Banagher warns everyone that the colony builder is being targeted. Everyone on board the Argama are shocked to hear that Grips 2 is repaired and ready to fire, and Banagher decides to defend Magalonica with a Psycho Field. At the Cheyenne base, even with Bright threatening to turn Londo Bell on the Federation, it's not enough to stop Ronan from engaging Grips 2. Which turns out to be a bad idea that everyone freaks out about when they learn that Ride is the one piloting the Banshee. The colony laser fires and the Unicorn and Banshee stand in the way, putting out Psycho Fields to stop the beam. The Unicorn is heavily damaged in the blast, but Marita's spirit reaches Banagher and he fully believes in using his inner strength and emotions to overcome, which protects him from certain death. Martha and the others wait for analysis on the colony builder, only to be amazed that it suffered no damage, and doubly so when the voice of Mineva reaches them over the radio. Mineva reveals to everyone that the original charter contained an article recognizing the importance of new types and the evolution of humanity. The deception of the Vist Foundation is revealed to the world, and Bright takes Martha into custody for questioning. Mobile suits from the General Revel are launched to attack the Argama, but now Banagher and the Unicorn are a super new type crystal being, and they just literally hand wave away all the enemy suits. The Unicorn can even fully repair itself now and is incredibly OP. The final episode ends with Banagher and Ride speeding off to assist the Magalonica, which is actually a huge ship, as it flees from the Federation and into an uncertain future. And that, everyone, was Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn, one of the most self-indulgent and bombastic entries in the Gundam franchise, but in a good way. While it's mired neck-deep in new type magic and a metaphysical solution to most of its own problems, the things that I really loved about Unicorn were the attention to detail and the reverence it has for its own history. Obviously, the most standout part of the show is its presentation. The animation, both CG and traditional, is beautiful, and the music is just as good. On top of that, Unicorn has some of the coolest design mecha in the entire series, and I will always stand both the Jesta and the Jegan. I think the biggest negative that you can levy at Unicorn is that it is a story that was sort of plopped into the middle of the continuity. While opening Laplace's box and revealing the original charter of the Federation seems like it should be a huge deal, it doesn't really come to the forefront again in a meaningful way, at least not yet. You could say that opening the box weakened the Federation to the point that the events of F91 and Victory could happen, but you could also argue that the corruption that has always been present within the organization could have the same outcome. Either way, Unicorn is a celebration of Gundam, and like it or not, it was and continues to be a huge hit for both Sunrise and Bandai. Personally, I do really like Unicorn, though I found it to be quite dense and kind of hard to sit through at certain points. It's definitely a strange beast, and I can't recommend it to people just starting out with the Gundam franchise. However, if you're a big fan of the Universal Century, this would be a weird one to skip, since it presents itself as such a big part of that series' continuity. Plus, I mean, this is the most money I've ever seen committed to a mecha anime in quite some time, and you just don't get that every day. And that brings us to the end of the Unicorn discussion. It was a long one that took a big chunk of the summer, but I want to thank you for letting me get a little indulgent and lost in the details. Keep an eye out for some new content soon, and I will see you all later. Okay, hello and welcome to today's end card. Let me start off by thanking my channel members. aka Batosai, Argan, Griever, Brian Sanchez, D. Mills, Daniel Johnson, Danky Stank, Swanky Man, Cadetter V, Gert, Joe Castellanos, Joe Cavazos, John Lamb, Johnny G, Canto 20, McLean Nugent, Mr. Smash, Trey Hardy, Video Game Player 75, and Zappa Slave. Thank you guys all so much for being channel members, contributing, and being awesome. It pays my internet bill, basically, so that's, you know, that's cool. Thank you for being so patient with this one. Obviously, this was a really long episode. It's about as long as, like, well, if you put both parts together, it's the longest one. It did take a big chunk of the summer, but in the middle of this, like, break I took, basically, I went camping for a week. I had friends actually from Washington State out for a while, and you know, it was just a nice little, like, period to recharge my batteries and stuff like that, especially after the denseness that was Gundam Unicorn. And also I took this time to learn a new editing program. All the old videos were edited on what is it, Movie Studio Platinum or whatever. Well, it's whatever Sony Vegas eventually became, just because that's what I used to use, like, a long time ago when Vegas was still popular. So I just kept using that, even though it's terrible and, like, just a bad program. I moved on to DaVinci Resolve and taught myself DaVinci Resolve with some of the gaming gaming channel videos, which are easy to experiment with because they're very simple. And this is the first main channel video that I used Resolve to edit, so it probably took a little bit longer than normal because I'm not used to the program yet, but so far I really like it. That's another reason why it took a long time. I learned a whole new program for it, but it went well. So again, thank you very, very, very much. If you made it this far, please let me know. Plans for the future, well, up next is the Blue Gender video, which has been on the back burner for like 2 months. Obviously, we're going to move on to Gundam Age. I have some other ideas too, so for the rest of the summer, but yeah, keep an eye out for all of that, and we will see you very soon.